Hello and welcome to Just a Tiny Amount, your channel for all things stop motion. I'm Gordon Craig, and this week I have been beavering away at the gorilla puppet that we started. There was a high concentration of animals in that sentence. Never mind. In this video I'll be showing you how to make the large number of mouthpieces that will enable this puppet to speak. As always, if you are interested in following along with this project, or any of the other projects that I'm working on, please do subscribe. There will be a new video posted every Tuesday. Speaking of videos, let's crack on with this one. When we left off, the gorilla head was coming on nicely, but was distinctly lacking in the mouth department. What I needed to do was make 12 separate faces, each with a different mouth shape. Because these faces were going to follow the contours of the eye ridges, I needed to finish those first. So I started by covering the whole head in fur, and I'll show you how I did this when I come to covering the body in fur. Then, using latex mixed with acrylic paint, I gave it grey skin, and in doing so covered the join between the fur and the rest of the head. I was now ready to sculpt the mouthpieces on top of all of this. The most straightforward way of doing this would just be to sculpt 12 separate faces. This would be quite time consuming to try to maintain consistency amongst the elements that don't move, such as the nose. I could have made the decision to have one single static nose and then just replace the mouth underneath it. This, however, comes with two problems. First of all, I wanted to retain the option of moving the area around the nose for some mouth shapes. Secondly, there would always be a join between where the nose finishes and the mouth starts. This join would have to be removed in post-production. If I had one single piece for the entire nose and mouth, this join can be concealed where it meets the rest of the head. What I wanted to make was a template upon which the rest of the mouths could be shaped. As well as a base to build the jaw upon, it would also include the elements that don't change, including the nose and the top teeth. When a person talks, their top jaw remains stationary because it's attached to the rest of the skull. The only thing that actually moves is the bottom jaw and the lips. For this reason, the top teeth are always in the same position. This makes them a very useful reference point for working out where the lips and the bottom jaw needs to go. My next step was to build a base plate upon which the template would be built. This base plate would be attached to the head and ensure that any face made using the template would be held in a fixed orientation. The base plate was a section of balsa wood, cut into the shape of the face. Attached to it were two raised sections to help ensure that the template could only fit in one position. Onto that base plate I formed the template using Sculpey. This is great stuff, and I highly recommend giving it a go. You bake it in the oven at 130 degrees centigrade, which is too cool to set fire to the balsa wood, which is nice. When it was hard, I very gently pried out the base plate and made sure that I could easily insert it and remove it. Then I attached another small section of balsa wood to the head to bring the surface up level with the rest of the fur. Then, with the template in the right position, I stuck the base plate to this section of balsa wood. Now I can attach and remove this template as often as I like, and it will always end up in the same position. Now all I need is 12 copies of this template. Let me show you how that's done. I suppose that makes this episode a Tutorial Tuesday. It's been a while since I've played that animation. Before I start, it's worth pointing out that this technique is not just useful for making puppets. I've recently made a replacement strut for my Strandbeest. The general rule of thumb is that if you're making a cast of something soft, like adding silicone skin to an armature, then you use a hard mould made from something like plaster of Paris. If you are making a cast of something hard, like we are, then you make your mould of something soft, like silicone. The first thing you'll need to do is solve a logic problem based around the orientation of your object. In a mould, there will be at least two holes, one to let the plastic come in, and one for the air to get out. As you pour the liquid plastic in one hole, the level of the plastic will rise in the mould. If there's an area in the mould which points upwards, then as the plastic goes past, it'll trap a bubble of air in there, which is bad because that part will be missing from your eventual casting. One solution for that is to put the hole that allows the air to get out at the top part of that cavern. That way, as the plastic rises, the air is escaping through that hole, so the plastic will go up and follow it. For instance, let's take the template of the face as an example. If it was orientated horizontally in the mould, as the plastic comes in this side, If there's not a hole at the top of this nose section, then the air will get trapped in there and that bit will be missing. So one idea would be to put one hole here and the other hole here, and the plastic would come in and then flow out. That would be fine, but there are two problems with that. The first is that wherever the holes are placed will drastically change what the resulting casting is like, because there'll be a big stick of plastic coming out of it. What I don't want to do is carve away this excess plastic from this very delicate area around the end of the nose. What I would like to be the case is that the hole is located somewhere around the back, which won't be seen. The second problem is to do with pouring the silicone. The two holes in the mould are actually made by the supports that hold the object in position as we're making the mould itself. So in the previous example, there would be a cone here and a cone here. Then when the mould is ready, that becomes a hole here and a hole here. The problem with that is that the silicone again will rise from the bottom. If it does that, there's this big space underneath, which is just going to be one big air pocket, which will make our mould next to useless. So what we need to do is find an orientation of this and the inlet and outlet hole that means that there are no air pockets anywhere in either the mould making or the casting process. The solution that I settled upon was to have the template almost vertical. In this orientation, there's only horizontal surfaces at this lip and at the lip of the nostrils, which means that the air doesn't get trapped anywhere. Then with one cone underneath which touches this edge here, and a second post which rests underneath this edge here and just holds it up. It's actually this post here that will be the inlet, because that way the mould fills from the bottom and comes out through the cone at the top. The mould itself was made in a plastic cup. The template was arranged with its support on the bottom of a plastic cup that had been cut off, and then a lollipop stick attached to the side. This allows me to easily lower everything into place without having to try to awkwardly position it by hand. Then this is ready for the silicone. Silicone is measured in hardness, and you need to choose an appropriate silicone to make the mould. Too soft and it won't be rigid enough to hold the shape of the casting. Too firm and it gets quite hard to release the casting from the mould. I used this stuff, which has a Shaw A hardness of 27, which is about right. Anything in the 20s is what you're looking for. This gets mixed with a catalyst at a ratio of 10:1 into a rather appetizing looking pink goo. Please do not eat it. Mixing up the silicone will inevitably introduce bubbles. A good way to reduce these bubbles is when you're pouring silicone into your cup, do it slowly and from a height. This will form a long thin stream which will encourage the bubbles to burst. Let that dry and you should end up with something that looks a bit like this. Next you want to take a very sharp scalpel and remove your original. Where you place these cuts are quite important. If your original was shaped like a sphere, you would want to get the cut around the centre. If your cut was too far on either side, then the larger half of the mould will try and hold on to it when you're releasing it. Having it down the centre means it's easier to part and remove. Equally, if you are making a mould of something long and thin, you would want to cut the mould along the axis of it. With the template, I wanted to get the cut as close to the edge as possible. So to do this, I sliced through the hole that I knew aligned to the edge. It's always a good idea to slice through both the entrance and exit hole. This will make it easier to remove the inevitable cone of plastics that you're going to end up with. Another tip when cutting out the original is not to just make a straight cut down the side. Try and make a zigzag like that. This makes it a lot easier to align the mould later on. What I ended up with was two halves that looked like this. The final step was to put another incision along the axis of the post where the plastic will be coming in. This is so that I can release that without having to break the top and bottom off. I also made sure that the hole at the bottom of the inlet was free from obstruction so that the plastic could flow in easily. Now that you have the mould, it's time to do the casting. For casting in plastic, I use this stuff, which is Polytech Easy Flow 2-part resin. You mix equal parts of both, and then the clock is ticking. I prefer to swirl the two parts together vigorously rather than stirring it, as this reduces bubbles, and as we all know, bubbles are evil. You've got less than a minute to get the two parts mixed thoroughly and poured into the mould before they start to go hard. Then, after about half an hour, the casting should be hard enough to remove. Once you've finished one, you just rinse and repeat the process until you have a handful of rough castings. These will probably have a little bit of excess plastic around the edges, as well as the cones formed by the inlet and the outlet. Again, take a sharp scalpel and cut these off until you have nice clean castings. Then it's time to use our old friend Milliput to add the lips and jaw. Here you can see the 12 mouth shapes that I've made. The next thing I need to do is try these out with some sample lip syncs to make sure they all work together. But that is for another video. Until then, this is just a tiny amount. I'm Gordon Craig, and I shall see you next week.